Hello everybody. So recently my wife and I just got this Rubicon Jeep JL. It's a 2019 and we're planning on doing just some basic trails in our area, and I'm doing a few upgrades to it just to keep everything in good shape. I don't want any of the stuff underneath to get bent and destroyed, you know, over any small obstacles that we may face. So recently I just put on some of the skids from Barnes 4-wheel drive. Some of those are the rear frame lower control arm skid, the lower control arm skid at the axle, which is welded on. And then I did the front control arm skid on the front axle, which is welded on as well. And I didn't make a video on those, but I can after the video show you guys what those look like, how I installed them, so that maybe it'll help you in some way. Also, we just did the front axle disconnect as well. Me and my wife installed that together. It was a lot of fun out here in the garage working with her. But today I'm going to be working on installing these inner C gussets, also from Barnes 4-wheel drive. And the reason I thought I would make a video is because I was looking myself on YouTube last night, and there's really not a lot about it. And just like you, if you're watching this video, any little point, a tip or trick that you can get is very helpful and beneficial. So if you guys want, you can follow along and watch me install these, and maybe you can figure out what to do, or hopefully not, but what not to do. Either way, hopefully you can get something from the video. So let's go install these. I'll show you what I've done, how to get these on, and how I plan on welding them out. So to get started, I just wanted to give everyone a quick overview of the basic tools that I need and that I think you'll need as well. Let me flip the camera around and I'll show you. Obviously, you'll need the inner C gussets. You're going to need a ratchet with a 13mm socket. You could use a ratcheting end wrench as well. You're going to need a hammer. Doesn't have to be dead blow, could be any. A couple of pry bars I found were very useful. And obviously you're going to need some of your grinding and welding supplies. I would recommend obviously to wear safety glasses during that process because you're only given one set of eyeballs. Okay, so obviously you're going to want to have the wheel and tire off of the vehicle. The first thing we're going to do though to get started is to remove this bolt right here, which is just the wire that your ABS wire is mounted to keep everything out of the way. So we're going to go ahead and remove that bolt. Set that aside. And there is like a little hook in the back of the inner C there, or whatever you call that, that is also, the wire is also attached to it right here, you'll see. So just tuck that up out of the way for now. And one thing to keep in mind that I plan on doing is whenever you're welding and grinding on this stuff, you don't want these sparks to get to your brake line or this ABS wire, because you don't want to destroy those things. So what I plan on doing is getting some aluminum foil, tin foil from the house, wrapping that stuff so that the sparks will just hopefully just glide right off of it. So keep that in mind. Okay, so obviously next you're going to need both of your gussets. And from what I can tell, the bottom gusset, doesn't matter which side it's on. I did notice that one fit a little better than the other on this side, but the top one is directional. So it has this cutout on the one side, and that's to clear that bolt that we just took out. So one thing you'll notice too, let me tilt this down, is there's some casting marks on this, and it's going to make it slightly difficult to get these gussets on there. And that's kind of why you're going to need the hammer and the pry bars, is to clear those so that you get everything butted up and flush the way that it's supposed to be, or what I think is how it's supposed to be. Now I've already done this once, and that's why I kind of decided to make a video on it. Well, I say that I've already put these gussets in place and on and outline them, but I'm going to show you that process so you can see kind of how they go on and how I did it, so you can see where they need to be placed. So I'm going to start with the bottom one, and I'll show you here that there's these little marks, little clearance marks here, and what it does is it clears these. I realize now you can't see it, but it clears these little ears on the bottom of that C there. So we're going to line those up as best we can. You know what? Let me put you down here. I'm gonna be able to see better. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so what I did was I just kind of installed that part first right there on the mount, and then I just kind of rolled it up into place. And this is where you're going to use your hammer and just kind of tap it on. And, okay, well, it's not supposed to fall like that. Put that back on, and we're going to tap it on. Okay, so that is about where I think it's supposed to go. Let me pull this camera off the stand and I'll try to make that a little more clear for you. Okay, so here's what it looks like when everything's butted up and as flush as I could get it. So here's the ear that I was telling you about. And you can see how close this gusset is to it. Everything's fit up pretty nice. And you can see this radius here, how tightly fit it is around the axle there. And then on the back, one of the biggest things to watch for is to make sure that you don't have a really big gap here on the back of the axle. You don't want a giant gap that you got to feel there. You want it nice and flush. And as you can see, the back side, there's a small gap just because of the angle. But that's just because the back side is already very close to touching. So as far as I'm concerned, this is pretty close to what it should look like when it's fit up. And you can see the back side there, not a whole lot different. Everything, all the edges and gaps look fairly tight. Again, what I did is sorry, my hand's in the way. I installed that and then I went around it with a Sharpie just so I could see where I needed to clean the axle off. And what I'm gonna do too, let me show you. Let me get on the front. I apologize, the light's better up here. So what I'm gonna do too is all the places where this gusset is going to interfere or where it touches against the axle. Some of those places I'm gonna go through there and put a small bevel on there so that we can really get the weld to set down in there. And after I get done cleaning those, I'll kind of show you what I did so that maybe it'll help you too. Okay, so the upper C gusset is just about the same. All you do is get it lined up and then pound it on. And I apologize in advance. Whenever I'm beating on this, it's kind of loud. And the mic on the camera seems to kind of muffle my voice. I apologize for that. So we'll grab our upper gusset. Here it is. And kind of slide it on from the top. You'll want to kind of hold it to the back so you can get it down into place. And I noticed too that the bends on this are really tight. And that's kind of why you need the hammer and the pry bars to get it into place, because you kind of bend it to fit almost. But you don't want to bend it out ahead of time because then it won't have a tight fit. So keep that in mind. We'll start with the hammer. What I'm going to do is just beat the top of this ear and beat it flush up against the back of the axle. Don't want to mess up the wire. Okay, so I beat that down into place as best as I could tell. Now I'm going to grab my pry bar and I'm just going to pry right in between here, just to make sure that this is pushed out as far as it needs to be. There you go. Keep beating that down. I'm all the way down. I'm gonna pry it forward again. Okay, that's too far forward. Okay. I don't want these ears sticking up past the axle here, so I beat it back just a little bit. And I may go forward just a little. Just get that right where you like it. I like that. Let me show you. So I got it in place to where the axle and this are fairly close. This gusset sits back maybe a 1/16 of an inch right there. And to me, that is pretty good. And you can see the top is pretty flush. these ears don't stick out well past the top. And you'll notice as well that the gusset is meeting the axle. It is touching the axle right there in the back. So it is going to be kind of tough to weld right here while this is on the Jeep. You may have to use a stick welder, but I am going to try to use my MIG welder. So we'll see if it fits. And again, once you get that one in place, you're going to want to trace around it with a Sharpie and try to identify the edges that you want to put a bevel on them so that you get really good penetration. Okay, so that's done. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop these off here. And I'm going to go start by grinding these, which I can show you guys a little bit of that. I don't think you need help grinding if you're watching this video. Then we'll get the axle itself cleaned up and ready. Okay guys, I just wanted to show you the areas that I cleaned up on the gussets. So on the lower, you can see I just put a bevel on the bottom edge right there, approximately 45, do as best you can. And then on each side, I just did this outer radius, the inner part of the radius here, and then a little ways, probably about a ½ inch into that there. And I did that on both sides. And for the uppers, the only places I deemed necessary to do the radius was this section here and this section here through the radius. The rest of it along the axle itself has maybe a little bit of a gap or a radius already, and you don't need to put a double radius in there and have to stick a whole bunch of weld in there. So just keep that in mind. The only thing that you really need to radius is any place that it's, or bevel, is any place where it is just flat together, a real tight gap. You want to put that bevel in there so that you get as much penetration as possible. The other thing I'm going to do while I'm over here is clean off all of the edges of this where there's going to be weld. And mine didn't come painted, I'm sure yours won't either, but I chose to paint these beforehand. That way all the insides and everything that isn't going to be touched with the welder is already painted and ready, in hopes that it won't rust while it's on the Jeep. And you know, places that you can't get to, like the inside of these, I wanted them to have a little bit of paint on them just to prevent them from rusting too much. So it occurred to me while I was cleaning up those gussets that, you know, it might be more convenient to use an air-powered die grinder on some of this, especially in the tight places on this, all around this axle, trying to clean that stuff up. So if you have one of those available, you might try using it. But I know it's possible with just a regular grinder. I've seen a guy doing it. So just keep that in mind. If you got easier reach tool, you might want to use that. So I've cleaned up the gussets already. I cleaned up all around, you know, the areas that I think I'm going to be welding. Anything I don't want any paint getting anywhere. And now I'm going to clean up around the axle and get it ready for welding. Okay, so like I mentioned before, I'm going to go ahead and, since I'm going to be grinding over here, I'm going to go ahead and wrap these lines in some aluminum foil. I know this is going to be a boring process. I'm really hoping I can learn how to speed up that footage for you guys. But if I can't, be prepared to fast forward. And it doesn't have to be real fancy or anything. Just try to make sure that it's covered well. You don't want to damage that stuff. Especially if your wife's driving the Jeep every day, you don't want to be cutting any brake lines. Just one thing to keep in mind whenever you're doing this, especially whenever you're going to weld it, is that you can turn all this. You can turn this whole assembly. So just keep that in mind. Turn it, get things out of your way, make more room for yourself, make it as easy as possible. So you can see we got all around the edge here on top, both sides. all along this casting mark there on that edge. And then the bottom, you can see what we cleaned up there. I think you can. There we go. Clean that up. And then all along the bottom here. Apologize for the crappy camera work. Cleaned all this up. Just did the best we can. And then we did the top and bottom of the axle where the gusset is going to weld onto the axle. Oh, one thing I realized I forgot to clean was out this channel, because you are going to have to weld that closed according to the instructions. So make sure you clean all your paint out of there if you painted it, or just the mill scale from the factory from being laser cut. Really, the more I look at that, it's going to be pretty hard to get a MIG gun in there. So I'm hoping I don't have to break out the stick welder, but we'll see. Also, I just got the top brace or gusset put back in place, and I think, looking at it, I think I've got everything in place where I want it. So you can see for yourself. Everything. It probably wouldn't be a bad idea to give it a little preheat, even 100 degrees. Just give it something. It's a little cool in the shop. It's probably 50 degrees in here. So I'm probably going to just take a small torch and just heat all this stuff up, get it all equalized so that it's not cold and doesn't get shocked by going from cold to hot whenever I'm welding on it. So I don't know if it's necessary, but it is something to keep in mind. Might be something you want to do. Also, that's what else I was going to say. Whenever you are tacking this together, make sure you put tacks frequently. Make sure all of the corners are tacked. Make sure that it isn't going to move around whenever you go to start putting a full bead of weld on there. Wouldn't be a bad idea to, perhaps do, weld here, let that cool off a little bit, go to the other side, maybe weld down here, let that cool off for a little while. Don't just weld. I wouldn't recommend just welding the whole thing out and getting it super, super hot because you have these ball joints in there. You don't want to get those too hot either. So do what you can to weld it. Just short little welds, get whatever piece complete that weld, and let it sit, let it cool off. It should cool off fairly quickly because there's so much steel here for the heat to dissipate. But give it time. Give it some time to cool off. Preheat, at least to where it's warm. Then we'll get started tack welding. Okay, she's nice and warm to the touch. I'm gonna fire up the welder and get my hood. One thing I'll mention too, let me get my safety box. I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but every time I get done making a bead, it always leaves this little ball on the end of your wire. I always nip that ball off there. For some reason, it seems like if you don't take that little ball off there, whenever you start welding, it kind of tut before it gets going. But whenever I nip this off there, it seems like as soon as I start, it goes a lot smoother. So that's just one little tip. Maybe it'll help you. Okay, well, I lost quite a bit of footage in there of me talking and doing stuff. My phone was actually full, so I had to delete a couple of videos. Anyway, I got my first couple beads on there, so I welded this side up, And then I went to the opposite side, got this welded up, and I let it sit. It's probably been sitting now for 6 minutes, and it's warm to the touch. It's not bad. And I was gonna start a couple minutes ago till I figured out I was talking to myself, so, which I guess technically I still am if nobody's watching. Anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the bottom because it's the whole, the whole axle here is nice and cool down here. Or just warm to the touch anyway. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a couple beads down there. I'll probably do one on this side and then one on the opposite side. One thing that I missed that did not get recorded is to make sure, it is highly important that you disconnect your battery before you start welding on your vehicle. This one's already been disconnected. I disconnected it yesterday when I welded on those other skids. But I have heard horror stories where somehow the current gets back to the computer and it'll fry the computer in these vehicles. So that's something I wish I had mentioned at the beginning of the video. I'll probably go back and make some kind of an edit. Well, I'm not that smart. I'll probably put it in the comments or put some kind of text on the screen to warn people about that as well, is to make sure the battery's disconnected, because you do not want to mess that up on a new vehicle. I'm going to let that sit for a little while, let it cool to the touch on the top side, and then I'll do one of the welds up there. Top side's cool. The next two welds I'm gonna do is just basically a little bitty weld right there, and then that guy there, and maybe the opposite bottom, I'll do it as well. Okay, those are complete. Now the opposite bottom. Okay, I got that bottom one done. Well, this weld just on the opposite side. So now I'm gonna do the top side of this gusset right here. And then I'm gonna move around and I'm gonna weld this area here. We're gonna let this whole assembly cool, and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, it's cooled off pretty good. So I'm gonna do this weld here, but on both sides. Let that sit a moment. I did kind of look to see if my cup was going to clear on the top of the axle, you know, in between here. And it doesn't really. If you are using flux core, you don't have to have the cup on there, as long as it's not dual shield. If you're just using regular flux core wire, you don't need gas. You won't have a problem getting to that. I was putting one of my stick rods in there and it would work a lot better, but I think my welding machine battery is dead. It's a gas-powered welder generator. So I'm kind of debating maybe trying to long arc it, which I don't necessarily recommend, but if I could turn my gas up and turn my wire up, then maybe it won't melt before it gets there. So if you know anything about welding, you know what I mean. Anyway, we'll see what we can do. Okay, it's cooled off pretty good. I know some people probably won't believe me because it's the internet, but touching the bottom, nice and cool. I mean, not cool, but warm. It's still warm, but it's not blazing hot. So now I'm going to do this weld, but on the opposite side because I haven't done it yet. And then I'm going to come through and do this weld on this side. And after that one's complete, we'll let that cool again. Because about the only welds I have left on the top are these really long ones, and those I'm probably just going to do one at a time because it is such a long weld. It's really going to heat up all this steel here. We want to be careful that we don't want things getting too hot. So here we go. Oops.
It happens.
I don't like to sit in my own filth. That side is done. completely on the bottom done. And now I'm going to do right around there. Another tip for welding is make sure your whip isn't bound up, because the less resistance you have in there, the more consistent your wire feed speed will be, and the more consistent your welds will be. So that's just a little advice. Okay, that is that. One thing too, I forgot that I have these yet to do on the bottom. Let me see if I can show you. So you're going to want to weld up these seams too. That is part of the structure that makes these strong. I don't think, I mean, really water shouldn't get in there if you have it. No, that's a lie. Water will get in there, but those aren't meant to be weep holes. Those are meant to be plug weld and then weld that out. Usually you can do it in one swipe. It's really easy. But you do need to weld those up on both sides. And really, now that we're talking about water drainage, it wouldn't be a bad idea to drill a small hole right there for water to drain out, and I think I'll probably will do that. But here in a minute, whenever all that cools off, I'll probably move up top, like I said, and I'll start with one of these long seams. We'll get it done, and we'll come back when that's ready. Okay, we are just lukewarm on the top of this guy, so I'm gonna go ahead and make this a little bit longer weld right there. And what I'll do is I'll probably tie it in to this weld, and then whenever I come back through and weld this, it'll all blend it together pretty well. Another good tip is to get in a position you're comfortable and kind of run through your entire weld path and make sure that your whole all your movements are smooth. That is that weld right there. It is complete. Like I said, I tied those together. Then whenever I do that little seam in the middle, it'll all be already built up right there. I'll probably start right here because there's such a big gap there, and as you can see, there's no backing once you get to about this point. It's all just open space. So if you're patient, you can get that built up without stopping. You don't have to do a bunch of zots. But since it's built up here, I can fill that up, and I want to penetrate all the way to the, I keep wanting to say knuckle, but the axle, the C here. Then once you get past that point where it has no backing, you can just kind of angle your wire into that previous weld, and you can fill that in and build it up. So once this cools, I'll weld this again, but on the other side. The only thing left to do will be to fill these in, seams we just talked about, and then do the top of the axle, and that'll be it for the top gusset. I'm still undecided how I'm going to do that, so we'll figure it out. Okay, so the top is still pretty warm. I'm going to go ahead and move to the bottom down here and weld this long seam down here. Down here it's nice and just lukewarm, barely warm. So I'm going to go ahead and weld this guy. Then besides that on the bottom, the only thing I lack is these. And I've been debating, these are truly meant to be plug welded, but I think what I'm going to do, because this is all going to be plenty strong, I'm just going to leave these holes open on both sides and just weld this seam right here. That way water can escape and it doesn't corrode real bad. So yeah, let's get started. Yep. Welded. That is going to be screaming hot, so I'm going to monitor that, and I may blow some air on that ball joint down there, just real lightly. Don't want to cool it off too fast, but I don't want too much heat to soak through and get to the ball joint. So I'm going to feel around on that and see what I can do. All right, so I went ahead and welded the opposite side here. off camera. I didn't figure it made much sense to make you guys sit through that since you can't see it. I really doubt you're gonna be able to see any of this, but I'm gonna be welding this seam closed right here. I'm starting to realize how bad of an idea it is to weld with my cell phone so close because it's covered in berries. Oh well. There is that. As you can see, it's welded all the way around the back, all down the side. Not super pretty, but it'll do. Now I'm going to work on getting these seams welded up on both sides. Again, I'm going to go ahead and not weld these holes there. I'm not going to plug weld those just because I want the water to drain out, because the water can enter free and clear right here. So I want a place for it to exit. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave those open, even though I don't want to. I'd kind of rather drill a hole, but I'm not going to. So. I got both of these outers done on both sides. And now I'm gonna work on welding the gusset to the axle tube right here. And I may do this in 2 welds. Stop in the middle, top, start and stop in the middle. All right, so apparently my phone's full again and I lost a bunch of that footage, but I did get everything welded out, and I'll show you. I did get the top of the axle done too. The weld just isn't super pretty, but I think it's tied in good enough. So there's the top of the axle. Like I said, it's not really pretty at all, but it's there. And here's the rest of our welds. You can see it is all done. And all around the back. So that actually took me a lot longer than I thought with filming. It still probably would have taken me 3 hours to get it done. I'm kind of slow anyway, but you can get it done. The other side is going to be identical to this, so if you can do this side, you can do the other. But like I said, I will go ahead and show you guys the other skids that I put on. Not really sure if you guys care about those or not, but it's the end of the video, so I'll show them. So there's one of the front control arm skids that I welded on. And of course there's the other one. And then this is that front axle actuator skid that just bolts on. And I'll take you around back. So on the back here you can see this lower control arm skid that is welded on. And then there is the frame to lower control arm skid that just bolts on. And on those, they came with 2 bolts to do this front instead of just one long bolt that goes all the way through, which I would have rather had one long bolt that goes all the way through because it wouldn't trap the lower control arm in there. Now with this skid welded on here on the back and that thing bolted on, in order to get the lower control arms out, you'll have to disconnect both sides and roll the axle back. But if that had just one long bolt that went all the way through, you could just unbolt that whole thing, but you can't do that since the bolts have nuts on the inside. So anyway, that's going to be kind of a pain if we ever have to change that out. But anyway, it is what it is. Well, thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, let me know. If you have any critiques, let me know. Let me know in the comments. I'm not saying I did this right. This is just the way I did it. It's the way I understood the instructions. So if you have a better way, let me know. Thank you.